Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome to the show. Sorry it took us a little long, but we're here. As usual, it's me, Stretch,
and Berto. What's up, guys?
and Berto, back again to explore another topic that is relevant to the people of this great nation. What? Nah. Whatever. All the emotions, dude.
So many emotions.
So many emotions, dude.
So many emotions.
All right, so as you can see, the title of this stream is Inflation Lesson. Yes, you heard me right. We're going to be discussing inflation tonight. But before that, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance because that's what we do. Because if you ever went to any government thing, they always start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. And not to say that this is a government thing, but we are discussing the government, and this is how we're going to do it because we love this country and we want to see it thrive and prosper for another, I don't know, what do you think, a million years?
Let's go a million years.
Million? Yeah. Maybe two.
Yeah. Why not?
Let's get crazy.
Sky's the limit.
2 million years traveling throughout the universe, talking about Abraham Lincoln and George Washington to all the friendly people we're going to meet all over the universe. So, with that being said, and for the Pledge of Allegiance, as we always do and always will do.
All right. You ready? Everybody online ready? Let's do it. All righty.
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Woo! Yes.
Okay, so now, what we got going on here is a video that's going to briefly explain inflation by a very smart man, much smarter than me and Alberto.
For sure.
You might have heard his name before. It's Milton Friedman. And basically he explains how government creates inflation. So let's see what he's got to say.
Yes, sir.
In a recent interview of U.S. News & World Report, Secretary of the Treasury Blumenthal blamed our current rising inflation in a large part on our foreign trade and unions. He did, however, say that the government was little to blame. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes? Unfortunately, it is one of the defects of our political system that we always put a Secretary of the Treasury and other high government officials into a position in which, when they make public statements, they are almost driven. Well, what's the word I want to use? I want to use a polite word, equivocate. Secretary Blumenthal knows as well as you and I do that inflation does not come from trade unions. That doesn't mean that trade unions aren't grasping. Of course they are. But they don't produce inflation for one simple reason. They do not own a printing press on which you can turn out green pieces of paper. The only such printing press is in Washington. I say printing press, of course, in the modern age we do it in a more sophisticated way. We use bookkeepers and accountants and computers. But it comes down to the same thing. Inflation is made in Washington because only Washington can create money. And any other attribution to other groups of inflation is wrong. Consumers don't produce it. Producers don't produce it. The trade unions don't produce it. Foreign sheiks don't produce it. Oil imports don't produce it. What produces it It's too much government spending and too much government creation of money and nothing else.
I mean, that's it in a nutshell. Only the government can print money either physically or digitally. And they create money by spending money. Really, because can you think of a reason that they would need to put more money in circulation? That, like, the population is like, that's all I could think of, right, Berto? I mean, like, yeah, if you have a population explosion, I guess you need to have more money to give them. And maybe if the economy was booming and exploding and all this money.
Yeah.
But it just seems like nowadays is that they're just creating government programs, spending money on
Illegals?
illegal immigrants, giving them $2,000 a month,
Ukraine?
giving money to Ukraine, giving money to Israel. You know, you gotta you gotta maintain the industrial military complex. You know, and that's the sad thing, is like people aren't smart enough to realize once we pulled out of Afghanistan and Iraq, the military industrial complex is like, wait, how are we going to make money? We make bombs to sell America to drop on these, you know, in these wars. And so now, magically, after we pull out of Afghanistan, all this is happening. Ukraine, Israel, you know what I'm saying? So, like, I don't know how much it is to blame on Biden, because was it the military industrial complex forcing Biden to allow this stuff to happen, just to stuff their pocket? See, this is the shit that's going to make me die suddenly when I talk like this. like, dude.
Yeah.
What do you think, Alberto?
Well, our topic last week or 2 weeks ago was on immigration, and I think you said
Illegal immigration.
Yeah, there you go, illegal immigration for sure. Thank you. But I mean, when all these people are coming in, our government's like, well, there's a lot of people coming. We need to print more money, and I think
10 million.
Yeah, and that's the issue because, you know, prices and everything is up right now. And I mean, the biggest question I think that I have as a taxpayer is, is the prices going to go back down? And will they go down? And if so, when?
You know, Alberto, that's a great point. And unfortunately, I have the answer. Is that the prices for eggs and food and gas, well, theoretically, they don't come down because there's a misconception that inflation, or that when inflation goes down, that magically the prices of stuff will go back down. That's totally false. So really, the only way to bring the prices back down is to lower taxes. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure Democrats have a known history of never lowering taxes. I think that's accurate. Never. So that's why we need to hire Trump as president again, so that he can lower the taxes and bring the price of goods back down. Is because Democrats love regulation. They love government oversight of businesses. That costs businesses trillions of dollars every year to jump through all these hoops. So also, when Trump comes into power, he'll also reduce the regulations, which then reduces the financial burden on these businesses, which then will allow for these prices to come back down. But it's very deceiving when the news says, oh, today inflation went down 3%. It's like, it means nothing, almost, essentially. So, anyway, we're going to be learning about inflation together tonight alongside everybody else watching this video and this live stream. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We got at least 6 more videos queued up. We can pull up graphs and everything, but anyway, let's finish watching this video here.
Yes, sir.
He's not done answering the question.
Before you clap, let me point out that the reason why we have too much printed spending and too much printing of money is because you people want it. You and I. We're citizens. We run this country. If Congress has been voting higher and higher spending, why? Because it has been politically profitable for them to do it. If they have been voting higher spending and not voting the higher taxes to pay for it, why? Because it's been politically profitable to do it. We would all like to get something for nothing. And so the political process has been leading to Congress increasing spending, not increasing taxes, and financing the difference by the hidden tax of inflation. I think we are unwise.
The hidden tax of inflation. There you go. That's what I want you guys to hear.
But let's not blame the others. The problem, you know, in that famous statement of the cartoonist, we have met the enemy and they is us.
Yes, inflation is a hidden tax. Because the more you pay for something, the more taxes you pay. You pay a 5% tax on something. And so then when that something becomes double in price, then the 5%, all of a sudden,
Did he say, though, that the enemy is us?
I mean, yeah.
And did he say that because we're the people who put those politicians in?
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Because we're...
Huh. That's a lot to think about on that one.
Because the government, and more specifically the Democrat, preys on people's ignorance. Not every American is has a degree in economics, although in a perfect world.
Yeah. As long as we can read, we're good.
Yeah, you can read, and then 2 + 2 = 4 for now. You know, you're good, you know. No, our education system is grossly unperformed. It's just a disgusting thing, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
just don't throw up. Don't. Oh God! Oh, my shoe. Clean that up later.
Dude, man,
It's all good. Oh man,
I got a towel.
Yeah, I'll sweat it. We'll take care of that later. Anyways,
My bad, bro.
hey, it's probably gonna happen 2 more times tonight. We're good.
That's not gonna be the last
Right.
time it happens.
It is on my shoe though.
It is what it is, you know. And
Gosh.
that's
Yeah, let's get back to it.
you know that's
Inflation
probably gonna
It's
take
more
the
important right now than
take the shine off his shoe. You know what I'm saying? You ever do that, right? This is a really interesting video about recession, hyperinflation, and stagflation. It's a crash course. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's a really awesome YouTube channel. You can learn so much on it. It's really an amazing resource, to say the least. And I found it very informative, and I hope you will too. Let's check it out.
I'm Jacob Clifford.
And I'm Adrienne Hill.
And today, finally, Crash Course is going to live up to its name. We're going to talk about crashes, economic crashes.
Crash Course, we've been waiting for this. In Germany in 1923, people were doing strange things. like using money to wallpaper their houses and burning money for heat. What was going on? Had they all gone crazy? Nope. In the early 1920s, Germany was in the grip of something called hyperinflation. In order to pay massive reparations to the Allies after World War I, Germany printed a lot of their currency, the mark. One result of
Yeah, we all seen how that worked out. And I don't even know if she says anything of. She says one result. Let's see what she says.
all this additional money was higher and higher prices. By November 1923, it took 1 trillion marks to buy $1 US. There were 1,000 billion mark notes in circulation. The mark was effectively meaningless. A similar situation developed in Zimbabwe a few years ago.
And then, of course, Hitler rose to power, and which makes you think, you know, if America has runaway inflation like that, I don't even gotta say it, but
It's a scary thought. I mean, we're getting closer and closer. I mean, milk used to be what, $1.50. You know, a couple years ago to $2. Now it's up to $3, $4, $5 at certain places. Don't go to the gas station and get your milk. Oh yeah, it's like $6, $7 there.
yeah, you know, like that's one barometer that I always looked at is how much is a gallon of milk compared to a gallon of gas. I always figured
Milk is more expensive than gas right now.
That's what I was saying is usually milk should be a little less than gas, but they're usually around the same price. But pay attention to that.
But it is, though. I mean, close. It's close.
Pay attention to that next time you go shopping for milk and look at the price of gas. It's just kind of a bizarre coincidence. I don't know. One has to do with the other.
Ago. Starting in 2007, inflation grew rapidly, like really, really rapidly. By September 2008, the International Monetary Fund estimated the annual inflation.
Oh, and who is president in 2008? I don't know. Alberto, do you know?
Barack Obama, I believe.
Oh my God!
Did I get that right? I got that right.
Nailed it. Nailed it.
Oh man. Anyway, it's Trump's fault. Yep.
All right. These Democrats, you know, they're really awesome at the economy. You know what? That's what I tell people. We're not rich enough as a country to afford Democrat politicians. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, not here.
Yeah.
It's failing. Ask California. Ask Philadelphia. Chicago.
We can't afford Democrat politicians.
Can't.
You know what I mean?
Rate at 489 billion %. Fund estimated the annual inflation rate at 489 billion %. In practical terms, the Zimbabwean dollar lost 99.9% of its value between 2007 and 2008. It's hard to even imagine what.
Wow.
Thanks, Obama. Messed up Zimbabwe's economy somehow, dude. Huh. What a jerk.
That looks like. Prices nearly doubled every 24 hours, and businesses revised prices several times a day. In June 2008, the Economic Times reported that a loaf of bread now costs what 12 new cars did a decade ago. The government issued currency in huge denominations to keep up with rising prices. The $1 million bill, the $1 billion bill, and finally in 2009, the $100 trillion bill, the largest denomination of currency ever issued. The good news was that everyone was a billionaire, but the bad news was that those dollars were virtually worthless.
One definition of hyperinflation is when a country experiences a monthly inflation rate of over 50%, or around 13,000% annual inflation. But believe it or not, Zimbabwe's recent inflation isn't unique, and it's not the worst inflation in history. In fact, the worst was in Hungary in 1946. Between July 1945 and August 1946, the price level in Hungary rose by a factor of 3 times 10 to the 25th. And yes, any time.
You know what? You could say that they were probably kind of hungry.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. They were.
I could eat something right now.
Yeah, they were.
All this inflation talk is making me hungry.
They were hungry. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were hungry.
It's all right. said 3 times 10 to the 25. Did you what?
Dude, like
What?
that's that's talking about like almost in comparison to the amount of galaxies in the universe.
I hope he gives us the answer real quick off top. We should know this a bit.
No, man, you don't got to worry about doing the math. Just trust me. It's 10 with 25 zeros after it. Well, 3.
Anyway, yeah, let's not. No.
And yes, anytime you have to express your inflation rate using scientific notation, that's a bad thing. Besides the obvious confusion over what prices to charge for things, why is hyperinflation so bad? Well, inflation, and especially hyperinflation, erodes wealth. In Zimbabwe, people who had worked their whole lives and saved up for retirement
Starving
saw their
billionaire.
savings just wiped out. Extreme inflation also forces people to spend as quickly as possible rather than save or lend. So there's no money available to fund new businesses. And all that uncertainty limits foreign investment and trade. So hyperinflation is bad. But how does it happen? Let's go to the thought bubble.
So we're simplifying this stuff a lot, but the root of the problem in both Weimar Germany and Zimbabwe was that the
See,
government
Bernie
was
Sanders?
paying their bills by printing new money.
Oh, yeah.
An increase in the money supply can have 2 effects. It can increase output or increase prices or some combination of the two. Inflation starts when output is pushed to capacity and can't rise much further, but policymakers continue to increase the money supply. In theory, once output is maximized, the more money you print, the more inflation you'll get. Simple, right? Well, that doesn't fully explain why Germany's or Zimbabwe's inflation rose
All right, somebody needs to show this video to Biden, you know.
He's not going to watch it anyway.
Yeah, he'll
but-
probably fall asleep, you know, and shit his pants or something.
But
exponentially.
Biden did say that inflation is at a good time right now. He's saying that whoever he got the inflation from before is the reason why we're at where we're at. But I can remember my gas being $2 when Trump was president. A lot of things were much. Let's just say I had more money in my pocket, and I'm sure a lot of other Americans could say the same thing compared to where we're at 3 years in the Biden administration.
Well, and of course, Berto, it doesn't help that in order to win the 2020 or 2022 midterm elections, Biden was so smart to raid the oil reserves of America to temporarily reduce the price of gas so that Democrats could win elections and take the gas argument, the high gas price argument out the table. I mean, the guy's a genius, you know? Oh, and by the way, he hasn't refilled the reserves. It's not even on his list of things to do.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Is it important for us to have stuff in the reserves?
I think,
I mean,
last time I checked,
common sense.
I think we want to have a lot of oil just stored away
Just in case.
just in case, you know, because it is actually part of our national defense.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, last time I checked, I think like tanks and Hummers and airplanes, they take oil, you know, and so then if the Middle East has some sort of, I don't know, war,
Right.
and we depend on the Middle East to get our oil, because that's what Biden did. He basically shut down oil
And all the
mining
pipelines.
in America. So now we're even more dependent on overseas oil,
Right.
which you know, it's
Self-efficient. Yay. Self-efficient.
yeah. So right. So if World War III was to break out,
We got nothing in the bank
we're
for oil.
kind of in a precarious situation here. And I don't know. Maybe the world doesn't know that. Maybe China, Russia, and Iran, maybe they don't know that. Wait a minute. If me and you know that,
Yeah.
and we're just a couple of streamers on Twitch and YouTube, you know what? I'm pretty sure they know it, dude.
I think Putin knows.
Yeah, they know it.
Putin knows.
They know. All right, so let's keep watching this, and then you got
Bernie.
You got Bernie Sanders sitting up there.
Was the government really printing that much money? Not exactly. After a couple years of doubling prices, people started to expect high inflation, and that changed their behavior. Say you're planning to buy a new refrigerator, and you
This is funny. About 4 years ago, I bought a refrigerator. That refrigerator today is more expensive. Like,
And it probably is
Yeah.
a crappy one
It's-
too that breaks down in a few years because they don't make them like they used to.
dude, don't be dogging on my refrigerator, bro.
Hey man, I had to buy one too, and I had to spend well, not $5,000, but it was at least $3,500.
Yeah, nah, dude. If you spend $5,000 for a refrigerator, you ain't even looking at the price tag. You know, that's for sure.
No. And that red one looks really nice.
I mean, it looks nice. You know, it's kind of retro, but yeah. So can you believe it? Usually, an old technology refrigerator, you would think, right? As the years go on, it would become cheaper because it's the old edition, and they're coming out with a new one, which makes the old one cheaper.
Yeah.
And actually, miraculously, I can sell my refrigerator today and make $1,000.
I mean, you could. I mean, if you saw it at these prices, but I mean, what they said on hyperinflation, like the people expect it to be high, so they're gonna spend more because they're expecting it.
Right. Let's get back to the video.
And that changed their behavior. Say you're planning to buy a new refrigerator and you expect prices to rise quickly. You buy it as soon as possible before the prices had a chance to change. But with everyone following that logic, dollars start to circulate faster and faster and faster. Economists call the number of times a dollar is spent per year the velocity of money. When people spend their money as quickly as they get it, that increases velocity, which pushes inflation up even faster. You get a vicious cycle of higher prices, which lead to expectations of higher prices, which lead to higher prices. The hyperinflation in Germany ended when the government replaced the worthless mark with a new currency. Zimbabwe ended its hyperinflation by abandoning its currency altogether. Now its citizens use US dollars or currencies from neighboring countries. The good news is that prices have since
And see, so that could happen to us, and then we could use, I don't know,
The yen?
the yen from China.
Okay.
You know? So, hey, you know what?
Oh, they'll like that.
There's a way out.
Yeah, they'll like that, especially
Yeah.
if they could take over our government and our country, because, I mean,
Right.
that's not part of their plan.
I mean, because they would definitely not want to do that ever, 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 ever.
Yeah. Don't get us started on fentanyl, all right? Because we know some of that crap is coming from over and from Asia.
Yeah,
Specifically
China. Yeah, China.
To the border.
Yeah,
Anyways,
and
inflation talk.
it
Sorry.
should be criminal. It should be a war crime that China is allowing fentanyl to come to America. I mean, I don't know.
It's
In a
insane.
sane world,
It's
and
insane.
but we don't live in a sane world, people. We got
Clearly.
guys thinking they're women and beating all the women's records in sports and athletes. Dude, I'm telling you, man, that the feminists, they're about to get sick and tired of this, and
Yeah, eventually.
there's going to be a giant backlash on the transgender movement.
Yeah.
Mark my words. Mark my words.
Yeah.
They keep fucking around or messing around in sports like they are. Trust me. It's like a rubber band, dude. It'll snap eventually, dude. Keep pushing it. Watch. Cause well when I dress up like a woman and I go into a store, the other women, they're cool with it. Well, yeah, because you're a 6 foot tall dude wearing a dress. What do you think? They're gonna confront you? Like, you're 10 times bigger than them, and you probably got a screw loose. Jesus Christ, man. All right, back to inflation.
Hold on. Oh, yeah, I got to say something. All right. We got none against transgender people. We're just going to make that clear. But if there's to be men's sport, women's sport, and people now, if they want to be transgender, it should be a transgender sport, and they should be, you know, in their own league, right? Yeah. And you know what? They can get their own thing, but let women.
They can get their own.
Let women be
they,
with women. Let men be with women,
Yeah.
and let transgenders be with transgender.
Yeah, they can.
And then we'll see who's the best out of.
Right.
You know.
They can get their own records.
Right.
You know, because their biology is totally goofed up with hormones and everything that they're messing
And
with.
they can do whatever they want to do
Playing
behind
God.
closed doors.
Right.
Do what you want to do, but you know, at this point,
Nah,
you know,
yeah.
men, transgenders or men should not walk into
a woman's locker room or a girl's bathroom.
Yeah. No.
Unless if you're super convincing as a woman,
Some are.
go into the woman's bathroom.
Yeah. Oh, that ain't, wait. Hold on. Is that a woman? I can't tell. I don't want to be judgy.
I mean, if you pull it off, do it. All right.
Yeah.
You broke the system. You hacked the matrix.
Right.
You figured it out. But like some of these dudes are not fooling anyone.
Right, but I
And
don't.
they're going into
some
girls'
people,
bathrooms.
Some people are using the
and they're
advantage of the transgenders. It's
and
like,
they're
well,
just scaring
I
people.
identify as a woman.
Yeah.
That's why I'm in here,
Yeah.
and then they happen to,
Well,
you know,
right,
the
and-
R word.
Well, and then it's like, are they going to take jobs away from women because technically they want to be a woman? So the job, you know, they have to have so many women on their payroll or something, you know. So why not hire a dude that says he's a woman, you know, which by all means I think is actually a great idea. You know, it sounds messed up, but
Anyway,
inflation. Look,
inflation.
I'll explain my thoughts.
Don't
my,
throw up again. Don't do it. I see it coming. Don't do it. Don't.
Dude, I'm not feeling good.
It's the transgender. Oh, my pants.
Ah!
Dude, my pants.
I got it all over your knees, and
Dude, we're good. We're good. Inflation. All right. Don't throw up again.
hey, we're gonna have a special episode solely devoted on transgender people. It will be coming, and I might actually have a transgender person live on stream with me, or at least live in Discord, so that we can really dive deep into the topic. So I really hope you guys would pay attention and come to that stream because it's coming soon. All right, so let's get back to the video here.
Stabilized and real GDP has begun to use US dollars or currencies from neighboring countries. The good news is that prices have since stabilized and real GDP has begun to increase.
Thanks, Thought Bubble. So if you ever control a national economy, try to avoid hyperinflation. You might also want to stay away from depressions. A depression is kind of a hard thing to define, but basically it's when real GDP falls and keeps falling for a long period of time. This has all sorts of terrible effects like high unemployment and falling prices. Before the 1930s, economists used the term depression to describe sustained falls in GDP. But after the Great Depression, economists started using the word recession for downturns to avoid association with the 1930s. I guess calling it a depression was just too depressing. When the stock market crashed in 1929, it didn't just cause problems for stockbrokers. Everyone freaked out and stopped spending, and the economy ground to a halt. Of course, that's not the only reason for the Great Depression. Actually, there's still a lot of debate about the causes. Anyway, when economies fall into deep recessions, there are more workers than there are jobs, and more output than consumers want to buy. So both income and prices fall. Central banks can try to use expansionary monetary policy to speed up the economy. So for example, in the US, the Federal Reserve can lower interest rates, and this encourages consumers and businesses to take out loans and hopefully get the economy going again. But if people start changing their expectations and anticipate further price declines, they'll change their behavior in ways that work against the central bank. Like if you're planning to buy a refrigerator and you expect prices to fall, you're going to wait to get a lower price. But if everyone follows that same logic, then spending declines, and so does the velocity of money. That leads to further price declines and a vicious cycle of falling prices, which leads to expectations of lower prices, which actually leads to lower prices. It also leads to layoffs at the refrigerator factory, and so on and so on and so on. This is called a liquidity trap, and some economists believe it's a big factor in worsening economic downturns, including the Great Depression.
Speaking of the Great Depression, after the initial crash of 1929, the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates to zero. Output and prices fell, and regular people started to expect further price declines. Unemployment rose to 25%, and the average family income dropped by around 40%. This is not great. Once interest rates hit zero and prices were still falling, the central bank was in a bind. Continuing deflation meant that borrowing money was a bad deal, even with no interest. The money you pay back in the future would have more buying power than the money you originally borrowed. This discouraged people from buying homes or cars and discouraged businesses from borrowing to expand capacity. In fact, getting out of the Depression took nearly a decade, and it wasn't really monetary policy that put an end to it. It was the massive government spending of World War II. Okay, you don't want hyperinflation, you don't want depressions, you also don't want stagflation. That's when output slows down or stops or stagnates at the same time that prices rise. So stagnant economy plus inflation equals stagflation. Get it? It's a portmanteau.
The U.S. experienced stagflation starting in the 1970s after a series of supply shocks, including a rise in oil prices and, believe it or not, a die-off of Peruvian anchovies, which were important for animal feed and fertilizers. This combination of events meant the economy couldn't produce as much. The Fed tried to address this by boosting the money supply and cutting interest rates, but output couldn't rise very much because of low productivity and the oil shortage. So all that extra money just triggered inflation. It got even worse when people began to adjust their inflation expectations. Businesses started to expect costs to rise even further, so they laid off workers, and that put the economy back into a recession. When the Fed boosted the money supply again, that raised inflation expectations even more. This ended in the early 80s when a new Federal Reserve chairman took over. His name was Paul Volcker. He actually cut the money supply and raised interest rates dramatically. Output plummeted and unemployment reached 10%. But prices stopped rising, and so did inflation expectations. The economy gradually recovered, and Paul Volcker got the credit for ending stagflation. So hyperinflation, deflation, depression, stagflation, they're all extreme economic circumstances. But these extremes show us why it's so important to measure and understand the overall economy. In some cases, government action or inaction made things worse. And in other cases, the government helped get the economy back on its feet. But it's important to keep in mind that the economy is made up of collective decisions of individuals. It's people like us. Our expectations matter. If enough people fear a recession, they're going to decrease their spending, and that's going to cause a recession.
Next week, we're going to look at different economic schools of thought. But regardless of philosophy, policies designed to steer the economy need to address expectations and focus on creating confidence.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Let's watch this next video about inflation. It's called "How Does Rising Interest Rates Control Inflation?"
Yeah.
You know, and that's one thing that I kind of noticed is when doing research for tonight's episode, I learned a lot about inflation. So I'm actually, unironically educating myself,
Yeah. There's just so many resources out there, and as long as we're being resourceful, we will most definitely learn so much than we possibly potentially can learn at a university where you're paying millions of dollars, well, thousands of dollars, and put you in debt to get a piece of paper. I don't think so. I'd rather just watch a few YouTube videos. What about you, Stretch?
Yeah, totally. I would just assume watch YouTube videos, sign up to some sort of educational website. Just
I bet you so many people today watch YouTube just to learn how to do something, and I bet you there's politicians today watching politician videos so they can be good politicians. Huh. Anyway, going on a rant. Let's go back to inflation. But is there anything else you want to add, Stretch?
Yeah,
I'm excited about this video, man.
Yeah,
I'm learning a lot.
Yeah, no, this is a really great video. It's about 8 minutes long, and it's about, how does rising interest rates control inflation. So this is very prudent to everything that's going on today.
All right, bring it on. Let's do it.
When central banks raise interest rates, it's big news.
Bankers judging that the only way they can try to pull down inflation is to carry on raising interest rates.
We're going to see rising rates.
Rising interest rates that will make the cost of borrowing go up.
It can send ripples across the whole economy. It can sink consumer confidence, result in fewer jobs and lower wages, and cause stock prices to fall.
If they go too far too fast, it can tip economies into recession.
So, why do central banks raise interest rates? Let's start with the basics. If you borrow money, you'll have to pay back a little extra to make it worthwhile for the lender.
Well, I think we can make you this loan. You have a good reputation. We know you're reliable.
I'm glad you think so.
This is the interest rate.
So if you are taking out a loan, you want the interest rate to be as low as possible so you don't have to pay that much back.
On the flip side, if you want to save money, then a high interest rate means you can earn more on your savings. See it as a reward for leaving money in your account. But the size of your reward depends on the circumstances.
There's no single interest rate in the economy. You've got thousands of banks setting their own commercial rates. That's all influenced, though, by the interest rate that the central bank sets.
A central bank is like a bank for banks. Just like you and your savings account, banks also earn interest when they leave money with a central bank.
Commercial banks have these things called reserves. So that's a bit like their cash on hand. Commercial banks lend those excess reserves to each other at an interest rate, and they also can deposit their excess reserves at the central bank. And when they do that, they can earn an interest rate. Ordinary people can't access the interest rate on the excess reserves, but it still affects them.
And that's the idea. When central banks raise interest rates, they're trying to control inflation, how fast prices rise for everyone.
They were 129, now they 139, and that's in the space of 4 weeks.
Central banks like the Fed or the Bank of England or the European Central Bank are all trying to hit an inflation target of 2%. Interest rates are a really powerful tool that they have to do that.
If inflation is seen as too high, that's when banks raise interest rates. The change spreads through the financial system and slows down the rate of inflation. Here's how. A rise in interest rates from a central bank means that a commercial bank will earn more on their reserves. They might make more from keeping their money in a central bank than lending it out. So if they do lend it out, they'll raise their interest rates to make it worth their while. How that affects consumers depends on the economy. Take mortgages. In places like Finland or Australia, lots of people have mortgages with variable interest rates.
If you've got a variable rate mortgage where the interest rate that you pay is linked to the central bank's interest rate, then higher interest rates mean that essentially immediately the higher rate will translate into less cash to spend on other things.
Less spare cash means households will spend less. And less spending means businesses will be warier of raising prices. This should lower inflation. In other countries, like America or Canada, a bigger share of mortgages are set at fixed rates. People with fixed rates are protected against the direct effects of an interest rate rise, but will still feel an indirect impact.
Higher interest rates mean that mortgages will become more expensive. If that is affecting all new buyers, then house prices will begin to fall, and that will make everyone who owns a home feel poorer, and therefore they might spend less. Lower spending will translate into lower inflation.
And it's not just consumers who will tighten the purse strings.
When interest rates rise, then businesses will find it more expensive to borrow and invest. That generally means less economic activity. It might mean fewer jobs are created.
Fewer jobs and lower wages could mean less money for households, and consumer confidence might suffer, which also means less spending.
People are grappling with a decline in real wages, meaning their money buys less.
When interest rates rise, that will tend to slow down spending, investment, and generally depress economic activity. Overall, that will make businesses more reluctant to raise their prices, and that will tend to pull back inflation.
It sounds straightforward, right? But the trick is judging how far to go. In 1981, the Federal Reserve, America's central bank, allowed interest rates to rise to a whopping 19%. The move curbed inflation, but it led to widespread economic pain.
I regret to say that we're in the worst economic mess since the Great Depression.
it is very difficult to get inflation under control without severely denting economic activity. In America, it's been over 70 years since they've managed to get inflation down from over 5% without causing a recession.
A little inflation is okay. It keeps the economy moving at a sensible speed. But inflation staying high for too long is a problem. Higher prices means employees will need higher wages, pushing up costs for businesses. That could drive up prices further, potentially leading to an upward spiral of wages and prices.
Retail inflation in India has surged to 7.8%. The combination of tepid economic activity and high inflation poses serious challenges for Indian economy going forward.
Central bankers are really concerned about setting expectations of inflation. The idea is that if it can show that it is credible, that it will always act to get inflation back down to 2%, then maybe it won't have to, raise interest rates and then lower them in this kind of seesaw fashion.
Raising interest rates can slow an economy right down. The trouble is, the brake pedal has a delay. It can take as long as 2 years to see the full results from interest rate changes. Central banks know this, so when they set interest rates, they're actually trying to read the road ahead. But predicting the future isn't easy.
The problem is, it's difficult for the central bank to work out whether the inflation will fall back on its own.
And even when central banks do get it right, they might still cause a crash. It may be a blunt instrument, but raising interest rates is still central banks' main tool for taming inflation.
Central bankers would say that yes, raising interest rates can be painful. Slowing down the economy is not fun, but it's worth it. It's worth it to get low and steady inflation so that in the long run, you don't have to think about it.
It's very informative. I mean, wouldn't you say so? I mean, learned a lot. Learned a lot. So we got a couple more videos in the queue. Let's watch this one. This is a news report of a current situation. Let's give it a whirl.
Now to some breaking news. Wall Street took a hit, with all three major indexes finishing the day in the red. The Dow fell more than 400 points after the Labor Department reported a higher than expected spike in inflation. The Consumer Price Index for March rose at an annual rate of 3.5%, and that is the biggest jump in 6 months. In tonight's Money Watch, CBS's Jolene Kent shows us how consumers are feeling the pinch.
For the third straight month, prices have gone up more than expected, from the rising cost of car insurance and repairs to how much you're paying at the grocery store every week.
Do you know how much one of these costs? $2 freaking.
This was $200.
We supposed to skip the power bill this month so we can buy groceries, or the mortgage?
Before the pandemic, all of these groceries, about 30 items, cost $100 on average. Now, 5 years later, according to Nielsen IQ, all this costs 33% more, meaning you'd have to skip about 10 items, like chicken, bread, milk, and bananas to make your $100 budget.
5 years ago versus today, the difference is remarkable. Is that normal?
Oh goodness, it's not normal at all. So that's why consumers are really scrutinizing their behaviors, because, prices are leveling off, but they're leveling off at these record high levels.
That woman journalist, she's so adorable. Is that normal? Like as if she was born yesterday? No. I know she has to say that, but she knows.
It's just crazy.
Is that normal?
I went shopping today. I spent $224 on some basic things that should have probably cost me $125.
I've only been alive for 33 years. Is this normal? I don't know. Has it happened in 33 years? The answer is no. I mean, even under Obama, it didn't even get this insane. So, well, you could say that at least. You know what? I'm not feeling good, dude.
Don't do it. Don't. Oh, gosh. I'm gonna take off my shoes.
Dude, just take off the shoes. I'll get you some bags you can put down there.
Man, that's 3 times tonight.
Dude.
I think that's a record. I mean, I know I've only done this twice. Yeah.
I didn't throw up this much last stream, so, I mean...
Inflation, man.
It's inflation. It's making me sick.
Higher gas prices and rent also helped push inflation up 3.5% over the last year. Also more expensive, baby food and formula spiking nearly 10%, elder care up over 14%, and veterinary care jumping almost 10%. President Biden responding today.
We're better situated than we were when we took office, where inflation was skyrocketing, and we have a plan to deal with it.
But until then, shoppers continue to cut corners where they can.
Oh, he's got a plan.
A plan, huh?
Well, it'd be nice to know the plan.
It would.
You know what? I bet it's almost like, don't. Right? Don't. That's his plan. Don't. You know, like, same thing with foreign policy.
Yeah. Don't ask questions.
Don't.
Just trust us.
Don't.
Huh.
We asked Americans, have you changed your behavior? And 87% of Americans have said yes to that. We may be seeing more, white meat on the barbecue than red meat this summer because beef prices have gone up 9%. Everybody's been impacted by this. There's no way you can get around it.
The good news here is wage growth last month did outpace inflation, but this March inflation number is the biggest annual jump in 6 months, and it really makes it very unlikely that the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates anytime soon. Nora?
Yeah, many people waiting on that. Jolene Kemp.
But what do we just learn about wages and inflation is that it's a hidden tax. It doesn't matter. It's a spiral. You can increase wages. It makes inflation worse.
Yep.
And that's why we're doing the stream tonight, is because we want to educate people on what's going on here, because it is complicated. It is a complicated topic. And if a lot of people don't quite understand it, and me and Berto, we're right there with you.
Right.
And that's why we decided to do the topic tonight, because we wanted to learn more about it, because we hear about it so much in the news. And so I hope you guys are learning. You're able to learn some stuff from these YouTube videos like we did, and become better Americans, So let's watch a video about the $6 trillion gap between Trump and Biden's tax plans. This just came out the other day, so it should be interesting. Let's check it out.
Biden and Donald Trump have very different tax plans they'd like to implement if elected for another term. Very different.
There's a $6 trillion difference, at least, between the two sides if each were to get its own ideal policies in place.
With broad tax cuts from 2017 set to expire at the end of next year, Biden and Trump are headed in opposite directions.
A fair tax code is how we invest things to make this country great.
And we will cut your taxes even further. That's what built our economy.
Here's what's in that $6 trillion.
Did you hear the difference? I don't know, Berto, what was the difference between what Biden said and what Trump just said?
Well, I mean, that's a good question there. Very good question. I mean, if we were to go back, is that Trump said exactly who built this economy, and it's the American people. Compared to Biden, to be honest with you, I didn't pay attention. That's a little wrong of me, a little biased, but Trump has said it right. A lot of what's going on with inflation, the people who are getting affected is the taxpayers, and we as the people, this is our land, and we the people will elect Trump again, so then he can help just this $6 billion. Did they say 6 billion or 6 trillion?
Trillion.
Okay, my bad. Yeah, $6 trillion is a difference. I wonder why.
So now, let's listen to this again, and I'll explain what I heard, and I'll explain.
In opposite directions.
All right.
A fair tax code is how we invest things to make this country great.
And we will cut your taxes even further. That's what built our economy.
Okay, so basically Biden said a fair tax code, and Trump said, I'm going to lower your taxes.
Right.
So the difference between a fair tax code and I'm going to cut your taxes is monumental.
Yeah.
All right, because if Biden was planning on cutting your taxes, he'd have just said that. But instead, he's got to use this secret words where, oh, it's a fair tax code. What does that even mean? You know, that's what I'm saying. Like, when you listen to a Democrat talk, you have to, it's so vague and nondescript, and Trump, he just comes out, I'm going to cut your taxes.
Right.
Why can't Biden just say something that blunt? Which would be the solution to the problem, is to cut your taxes.
Yeah.
What is a fair tax code?
I think that just means I'm going to keep taking your guys' money, raising the prices on everything,
Right,
and just deal with it.
Right,
Because it's better than the last administration.
Right, a fair tax code. What, he's going to raise the taxes on the super rich that already pay 80% of the taxes? What does that mean, fair? It would be fair if...
It sounds nice.
Yeah, what would be real fair is if poor people started paying more in taxes and not have the rich pay so much in taxes. That would be, I guess, fair, but also a horrible idea. And so that's why Trump just said, hey, I'm going to cut your taxes.
And he does. And
he will. And he did it.
And when he does, that means there's more money in our pockets.
Exactly.
And so, and earlier in the video is saying that less people are spending, and I mean, I wouldn't be spending a lot of money either, which I don't. But
right, inflation is a hidden tax.
Crazy.
Here's what's in that $6 trillion chasm, and the difficulties with turning those plans into law.
This is the bill right here, and we're very proud of it.
In December 2017, Trump signed into law the most far-reaching overhaul of the U.S. tax system in decades. The legislation included lower individual tax rates ending before January 1st, 2026, with a maximum rate of 37%, down from the previous 39.6%. Standard deduction increased. Child tax credit doubled. And the corporate tax rate was permanently slashed to 21%, its lowest point since 1939.
The goal was to try to spur investment, to give businesses more deductions, lower rates, lower taxes on their profits so they'd be more incentivized to make profits, to give people more money in their pockets so they would spend more money.
But the sweeping cuts also drew criticism.
The president is part of the top 1%, and the bill is aimed to help the top 1%.
If Congress does nothing, those individual tax cuts will expire at the end of 2025. And the government estimates that the national revenue would follow this line. Neither Biden nor Trump wants that to happen. Trump's plan would bring in less money than the revenue baseline. Biden's plan would collect more. The two agree on extending tax cuts for households that make under $400,000 a year. But there is a major difference in how they would tax big corporations and people at the highest income levels.
I will make the Trump tax cuts permanent. You know, they expire in a year. And we will cut your taxes even more than that.
Trump's approach to taxes is to try to lower them. Trump and Republicans really believe that low tax rates are incredibly important for the economy.
I mean, oh, what a horrible idea to lower taxes.
Yeah.
Oh.
If you're a Democrat.
Could you imagine? I mean, how is our bloated government supposed to get all their money for all their corruption? if we don't send them as much money, you know? I don't care.
Well, they could also be printing it, and that could be another reason why there's high inflation.
You mean to tell me that the government can just print money? Oh, like,
Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah. Can you imagine if we did that? Anyway.
if Trump did, I'm telling you, I hope 1 million people watch this video. That's all I'm saying, man.
I hope so. Great.
Extending those tax cuts would cost the government up to $4 trillion over the next decade.
It would cost the government $4 trillion if we cut taxes. That's the only time you ever hear it worded like that. How is not giving the government $4 trillion costing the government $4 trillion? It's just a weird way to say it.
It's only costing them money if they're printing it. But either way, these taxes are coming from somewhere. We're not going to play dumb. It's coming from the American taxpayers.
It was $4 trillion less than they wanted to have. And so then they say that costs the government. Dude.
It costs the people.
Yeah, it costs the people.
The people.
Not the government.
Yeah.
That's $4 trillion American dollars. Let's listen to the way she explains this again.
Extending those tax cuts would cost the government up to $4 trillion.
Yeah, but it would save the American people $4 trillion. Who do you think can better spend money? Me and you or a corrupt government?
The people.
I'm pretty sure it's us. So I would rather cost the government $4 trillion.
Oh, don't say that now. Government might be listening. So
Yeah,
careful what
they're listening. But guess what? With my mask on, with your mask on, dude, trust me, it's gonna be tricky to kill us. Maybe. I don't know. They probably know my IP address. But
either way,
either
way, we're screwed because we're paying taxes. Okay, end of story.
I got a social security number, Berto.
Yeah, I got one. I am legal.
Yeah,
I am legal.
You know what? If we were illegal immigrants, we could probably really pull this off. We could probably like steal internet from somewhere, some McDonald's, and then do this thing, somewhere. We'll figure it out, But unfortunately, we're not illegal immigrants, so.
No, very fortunate.
Very fortunate. So, anyway.
Over the next decade.
Miracle.
For example, keeping the reduced rates and wider tax brackets for ordinary income would cost some $2 trillion, and the expanded standard deduction would reduce federal revenue by over $900 billion.
There's been some back and forth among Republicans about exactly how comfortable they are with further increases in the deficit because of tax cuts. In the 2017 law, not everyone got a tax cut. There were things that raised money to help offset the changes they made. But in general, they weren't trying to keep things deficit neutral. They were willing to increase deficits in order to cut taxes. And that's a choice they'll have to make again.
On the other side of the divide, Biden wants not only to pay for the rate cuts he'd like to keep, but also bring in additional revenue. Getting that done would not be easy.
He wants to extend the tax cuts for people making under $400,000. So it's a couple $1 trillion, not the full $4 trillion, but a good chunk of that to keep those tax cuts going for most people.
Beyond that, Biden says he'll increase taxes in other areas to bring in more money for the government.
If you want to make or can make $1 million or millions of bucks, that's great. Just pay your fair share in taxes.
Fairness is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to taxes. His idea is basically that high-income people and corporations should pay more, and that money should go largely for new programs and for reducing deficit.
Dude, millionaires and billionaires already pay 80% of the taxes. What do you mean fair?
Yeah.
I don't get it, man.
Well, just to be fair, there are tax write-offs. And let's just be honest, for people who own businesses and big corporations, because they have jobs and because they have, these industries, it's bringing in money. You know what I mean? And because it's bringing in workers, bringing in revenue, there are some tax cuts that apply for those, how they call it the 1%, the Trumpers of the world, the Elon Musk of the world. They're paying taxes. It's just I mean, to be honest with you, I feel like the middle class are paying a little bit more, but that's only because of where we stand in our income.
Well,
But
we're paying
these guys are
taxes. We're paying taxes on groceries and gas.
everything else.
You know what I'm saying?
They're just in a higher bracket, if that makes sense.
Right. And so, what is this? Oh, the billionaires got to pay their fair share. It doesn't make any sense, because if you tax them, they're already getting taxed to death. If you tax them more, they can't create jobs. They're going to move overseas. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what are you left with? Raising the taxes on the middle class.
Yeah. I think it just creates division. It creates division by them saying that phrase.
Stop government spending. Slow it down.
Yeah,
dude.
that's what we all need to be treating.
Government is not the solution to every problem. Our community.
Less government, the better we are as people and as a nation.
Right. Our communities, we can take care of ourselves. We don't need to have some federal bureaucracy come in and say, "Here, I'm here to hey, I'm here to help." It's just like, dude, just go away. We got this.
Yeah. They're not helping, especially not right now.
No. And let's watch how long it takes them to fix that bridge that collapsed.
Biden hasn't laid out exactly where all of this money would come from, but he has outlined what would be some key revenue sources, including raising the corporate tax from 21% to 28%. The Treasury estimates that alone would garner some $1.3 trillion for the government over 10 years. He has also proposed taxes on individuals at the top, like an increased Medicare tax, revamping capital income taxes, and imposing a 25% minimum tax on the super rich. That set of changes would raise more than $1.8 trillion. Overall, Biden wants to cover the $4 trillion for continued tax cuts and raise taxes by more than $2 trillion on top of that. But there's a catch.
A lot of the tax increases that Biden is running on are ones that he ran on in 2020 or has proposed during his first term. Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House for 2021 and 2022, and very few of the tax increases they wanted got through. As we think about the $6 trillion or more gap between the two candidates, so much really depends on the results of the election.
Democrats and Republicans both want to extend tax cuts for the majority of Americans, but even getting that done will be messy.
There's likely to be one big tax bill in 2025. And so even if there's a point of agreement on what happens for the bulk of people, the revenue consequences, the distributional consequences, the political consequences are all tied to what happens to corporations and high-income people. People making under $400,000 should feel somewhat confident that their tax cuts will get extended because both parties want to do it, but it will be just inextricably linked to what happens broadly with all the pieces of the tax cuts that are contentious.
Yeah, trust me, if inflation keeps going the way it is, we're all gonna we'll make $400,000. Like middle class people will be making $400,000 a year in the next 3 years if inflation don't chill out.
Yeah, inflation's been going up. I mean,
I paint houses for a living.
Yeah.
How much do you make? About $400,000 a year.
Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, a bag of chips was 25 cents. Okay, today it doubled. It's at exactly 50 cents. Two for $1 when it used to be four for $1. I mean, it's. I think 25 cents was expensive then, but that's all I knew. But now it's a whole quarter more. That's 25% since when I was a young boy. 20 years to be exact.
So you're probably wondering who actually profits from inflation, because that's probably what should be going through your mind. Why does the government want inflation to happen? Because obviously it happened. It's not a shocking surprise. Oh my God, I didn't know I spent trillions of dollars. They knew what they were doing. So I'm about to play a video on what is the good side of inflation, if there is? Who benefits from this?
Know that excessive inflation is bad, as this often leads to situations like Venezuela or Zimbabwe, where their currencies have become devalued so much that
We
they're
learned
really
about
worthless.
Zimbabwe earlier.
Even inflation of just a couple percent each year is annoying, as you slowly see prices creeping up. Inflation of prices can occur for several reasons, from suddenly increased demand to simply a higher cost of labor. But one of the most consistent culprits causing inflation is the government, as they continuously print more and more money. And to make things worse, inflation doesn't seem to be helping anybody. It definitely isn't benefiting anyone who is saving money in a savings account, as they're losing value every single year, as savings account interest rates don't even come close to the inflation rate of 2.5 to 3%. These savers are straight up losing value every single year, just like retirees living on their savings. But it's not just them either. A similar story can be seen among businesses. With inflation, businesses are forced to pay more for their raw materials, workers, and charge more for their products. Though they get a lot of criticism for increasing prices, inflation doesn't really give them a higher profit margin. And as for the government, well, they too have to pay all of their state and federal employees more. Medicare has to support higher medical bills, and Social Security has to pay out more to beneficiaries. So, in the end, this inflation seems to neither be helping consumers, businesses, or the government. So, who is inflation actually profiting?
Good question. Hopefully this guy knows.
Well, the truth is, inflation actually helps every single one of these groups, just not directly. For consumers, inflation helps taking on good debt because it becomes much more manageable. Remember, this is only good debt, so this doesn't include car payments or credit cards. For everyday people, this probably means their mortgage. You may not realize it, but inflation helps the average person pay off his or her mortgage. While people often complain that wages have remained stagnant for a while now, this is actually not true in the grand scheme. Taking a look at the United States wages and salaries growth over the past 60 years, you'll see that other than the 2008 financial crisis, wages have been growing at a solid 4 to 7%, and most of this growth is thanks to inflation. As a result, the average person's salary grows, but the balance on their mortgage does not on a fixed rate mortgage. Of course, there's
Hey, you know what? I got a conspiracy theory. I think after President Bush became president, like they wanted to have the first black president because they knew that there was about to be a housing bubble crash, and basically they kind of set the black dude up to be like a failure in a sense. It's a conspiracy, maybe, I don't know. It's just, I think,
well,
if
that was true,
like they
he
said,
wouldn't have became a millionaire.
Well, yeah, well,
because he's now considered one of the top 1%, correct?
But I think, like, I don't know, our government was just like, hey, you know what? If there's a black dude as president and this housing bubble happens, America can't be mad at the government when it happens because there's a black guy, and then if you're mad at them, then you're racist. You know what I mean? So that's my conspiracy, is that Barack Obama was kind of like, why y'all want a black man to be president, man? Like he knew something was up. He's like, what the fuck? What are you guys gonna do, man? Why are you guys being so nice to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, that's my little conspiracy theory anyway about it. I got plenty of them. That's just one. Back to the video.
interest on these loans, but this would be present with or without inflation. Considering this, with time, the average person's mortgage will slowly take a smaller and smaller portion of their income, making it less of a burden. This is the same case with businesses. Businesses often take on debt in order to start up or during a rough financial situation. Over time, sure, their actual profit margin will not increase as they spend more to manufacture and sell at a higher price. However, their nominal income or the actual cash they receive does increase. Again, this will help them pay off their long-term debt as their balance does not increase aside from the fixed interest rate. This same principle would apply to the government as well, except it doesn't because they're the government. See, theoretically, they would make more money from taxes and meanwhile their loan payments would stay the same. But the thing is, as the government makes more money, they simply take on even more debt than the extra income can afford, and that's how they get into the downward spiral most governments are in. However, a well-managed government should also benefit from inflation. As you can see, inflation makes long-term, fixed-rate mortgages easier to pay off, whether you're an average person, business owner, or the government. Of course, given you actually have an intention to pay it off. Moving on, inflation also encourages investment in real assets. Sure, storing away money in a savings account won't do much for the average person, but investing that money would, whether that's stocks, real estate, or retirement accounts. In the stock market, one of the safest and most reliable investments is mutual funds, which generally profit 7% per year and have a sturdy record over the past century. After accounting for inflation, you'll see that this investment would return a 4% real value growth. Similarly, buying a simple single-family rental property would on average provide 7 to 10% return on investment, meaning a 4 to 7% real value growth. As you can see, inflation acts as a deterrent for consumers as well as businesses from keeping money idle, as this would result in a loss of value. Aside from simply helping everyday people and businesses make a bit more money by encouraging them to invest more often, inflation's arguably most important role is the prevention of deflation. Deflation is when the cost of goods decreases year after year and the value of money increases. While this sounds really good, this is actually terrible for the economy, as this often results in a recession leading to massive job losses, investment losses, and just less innovative progress in general.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Alberto. Is that as bad as inflation is,
Right.
deflation is just as bad.
Right.
You know, and from what I've learned preparing for this episode of the show is that basically you want to have very little inflation over time. And that's just the way it is. It's better than deflation over time.
Right.
It's just, and it does make sense because
But it's good to have inflation and wages be like rising together compared to one being above than another.
chasing. Yeah, you don't want wages chasing inflation.
So inflation
like that.
necessarily it is not always
It's-
bad,
Right.
but it all depends on where the rate of
Yeah.
the dollar and of items. So yeah, we're learning.
Yeah, so it does seem like a steady little inflation is inevitable. And because as a population grows, there needs to be more money put in to sustain the population growth. So when the government prints more money to give to more people, it makes sense. Then it slowly brings. But now, in a perfect world, we'd be on the gold standard, and that could totally change everything.
Yeah.
As far as the value of the dollar on the gold standard. And you know what? Maybe that's going to be another topic for another episode where we talk about gold and silver and
Precious metals.
Yeah.
Because that's where it's at right now. Because that's where there's value in that.
Yeah.
Not a dollar bill currently because we're not on gold.
Because last week, I think gold spiked up to like $2,300 an ounce. Silver went up to $27 an ounce. So that very bizarre. So I don't know how much of that is due to inflation. Probably not. But look forward to that episode where we're going to go into a deep dive about gold and silver. Because you always hear, oh, invest in gold and silver, blah, blah, blah. You know, don't go in the stock market. Oh, it fluctuates too much. So I'm really interested in doing a deep dive in that topic very soon. And I hope maybe to get a guest on here at least on the phone, that can help explain it to us. If not, we'll just have the YouTube videos, you know what I mean? So, anyway, let's finish watching this video. Without further ado, let's continue the review.
In the end, while inflation is annoying at first glance, it benefits everybody in a given country. The advantages are exemplified if you are any sort of investor, whether a local business owner or just an average homeowner, as rent will go up, but mortgages will not. Moreover, it encourages ordinary people to get involved in investing, as they will lose value.
Wait. Listen to this again. Hold on. What do you talk about, rent? Because this is very interesting. Because a lot of times, people that rent apartments are Democrats. And so they think, oh, they're going to raise taxes on mortgages or whatever. My rent's not going to go up because I don't have a mortgage.
Right.
They fail to realize that the building they live in has a mortgage.
Yeah.
And the dude, their landlord, pays that mortgage. So when the mortgage goes up,
the rent goes up.
Ding, ding, ding. All right, so let's listen to what this guy said. I don't know if it kind of sounded like he was wrong or something. I don't know. Listen.
Whether a local business owner or just an average homeowner, as rent will go up, but mortgages will not. Moreover, it encourages...
Wait, rent will go up, but mortgages won't. No. Wait. What?
Let it play.
No, the mortgage goes, that causes the rent to go. Maybe he explains this. Maybe we gotta let the video play out.
Ordinary people to get involved in investing, as they will lose value by letting it sit in a bank account, unless it's a Swiss bank account, but that's a whole nother story. And even for the people who refuse to invest and simply store all of their money in a bank account, sure, your money may be losing value, but the economic growth around you will provide you with not only significantly higher job security, but also higher quality of life, as economic growth churns out better ways to handle everyday problems, whether simply mowing the lawn or curing a life-threatening disease. So, before you complain about rising costs next time, take a step back and admire all of these benefits that often go unnoticed. If you guys thought this video explained how you...
I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a believer of a savings account. It just sounds kind of stupid to me. If you're gonna have tens of thousands of dollars in a savings account,
if there's value in that dollar bill, then it's a good thing. But the thing is that there's just so much getting printed out to the point that our dollar bill, it's not worth anything. So for people who are saving, it's in today's world, I think it's a bad thing, because the more money today, there's value, but tomorrow the value keeps decreasing. So it's more of like you're putting your money into something that little by little by little, there's a decrease in the value of it.
Right.
So over time, it basically, you worked for what?
Right. And there's supposedly like an interest on your money when you put it in the bank account. And so like every year your bank account grows 1% by just letting it sit in the bank account. That does not keep up with inflation at all. It's stupid. So like you're losing money when you keep your money in the bank account, a savings account. You're better off buying an antique thing because that's going to become more valuable in 5 years than your $500 is, that you spent on the antique thing, so I don't know.
Yeah, that was a video that was a little different, but I'm glad we played it because it's from a different angle, from a different perspective.
Yeah, that's why I played it.
The people. which, I mean, I had a guy today telling me that, oh man, yeah, the economy right now is not doing so well, but if you're renting out, it is. He's making money because of how things are going up, and he's making a profit. So he says necessarily if you're, you know, he's a renter, so he's renting out, but he's actually making a profit because the fact is he had to go up on rent, and he's making a little bit more extra. So for some people, inflation can be good, and for some people, it could be bad. It's just, I guess, perspective, maybe mindset.
And here's kind of the learning. I'm not going to say that I'm like one of the smartest people alive, you know, but this is where the learning comes into play with me, is that let's say the landlord that owns the apartment has a fixed mortgage. That means that this economy doesn't really affect him. So really, he doesn't need to raise the rent of his renters because he's in a fixed mortgage. His mortgage didn't go up and down, you know, like it, you know, so he has really no reason to raise the rent on his renters. But that's just for one example, because other people maybe have a variable mortgage that fluctuates. And maybe that's how I don't own apartments, so I don't really know what's better to do, a variable rate mortgage or a fixed rate mortgage. But if you think about it, if they have a fixed rate mortgage, when their tenants, if you raise the, almost like you're tricking the tenants, you're lying to them. Well, you know, housing is going up. That's why I got to raise your rent. You know, it's what do you call that? Oh, like a slumlord? Yeah. And so then he knows he doesn't have to raise rent. His mortgage didn't increase. And yet he's taking advantage of the ignorance of his tenants, or he's going to raise the rent on his tenants to get them to move out so he can get better tenants that will be able to pay more, because inflation on a fixed rate, you can actually pay off the mortgage faster with the same amount of money. Yeah. Well, because everybody gets more money, and that's what makes it pay off the mortgage faster. So, dude, I'm telling you, if you're renting and your rent goes up, you better talk to your landlord and be like, hey, is your fixed rate mortgage? Because your mortgage didn't go up. It doesn't cost you any more. So anyway, there we go. It's all about learning tonight and every episode. You know, I'm here to learn. Berto's here to learn. Yes, sir. You're here to learn. We're all here to learn and then die. Yeah. That's what life's all about. Learn and die. Rinse and repeat. One more video. It's 11.5 minutes long. Why the U.S. won't pay down its debt. Haven't you ever wondered that, Berto?
I mean,
why don't we pay our debt down? Right? Everybody, I think, wonders that, right?
Yeah. We keep printing it. You think all the money we printed, we could have paid off a little bit of it.
We keep going into debt with China.
Maybe there's good debt.
What are we doing? Why are we into debt with China so badly? Why don't we pay down the debt? Maybe is it just as simple as, if you're a politician and you say, I'm going to pay down the debt, Americans don't vote for you. Could that just be the answer?
I think there's a few other ones, but
that might be
top one.
Right. We got to cut spending and pay down our debt. Well, I'm not voting for that guy.
Yeah.
Let's check out this video.
Nearly $33 trillion. That's what the U.S. national debt was as of early September 2023. At the end of July 2023, when the debt was about $300 billion less, roughly $7 trillion of that was intragovernmental debt holdings, meaning the government owes itself that money. The majority of the debt, about $25.7 trillion, was held by the public.
The thing that we refer to as the national debt is really nothing more than an accounting record. It's keeping track of how many dollars the government has added to the broader economy, minus how many dollars it has subtracted away from us, mostly through taxation.
Is there a reason you should want debt to be zero, precisely zero? No, there's no reason for that. Debt has many useful purposes. It's very useful for emergencies.
The national debt increased by nearly 90% since the beginning of the pandemic. But many economists and politicians warn that the ever-expanding national debt can be harmful to the economy.
And unfortunately, we're using it for rainy days and sunny days right now.
We have to think about the interest rate on what we pay for our borrowing. We have to think about the growth rate in our economy. If the growth rate is faster than the interest rate, then that makes that debt more sustainable.
The U.S. economy certainly has the resources to pay down the debt over time, or at least to stop the increase in debt, but we need political action for that to happen.
So why can't the U.S. get a handle on its national debt? And does it even have to? The majority of the U.S. debt is held by the public in the form of government securities, such as treasury bonds, notes, and bills.
When the government borrows money, it does that by issuing a bond, which is a piece of paper that either says, I owe you this much money in the future, or I'm going to pay you interest at these particular time horizons and then pay you back the full amount at some other time in the future.
Government is giving us the ability to trade in some of the dollars that it has supplied for a different kind of U.S. dollar called a government security.
The U.S. dollar represents the reserve currency for the world, so lots of people want to own our treasuries.
Treasury debt is considered an extraordinarily safe, secure asset, and somebody who's looking for a safe, secure asset would naturally be attracted to buy U.S. government bonds.
So public debt has always been used for emergencies. It's easier to finance by borrowing than to burden the current generation with taxes. We saw debt rise dramatically in the late 2000s after the global financial crisis, and we saw debt rise again during COVID. The debt, in some ways, is a contingency plan that we use to smooth out otherwise what would be big shocks to our economy.
The problem is that we keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing day in and day out. So we're not borrowing for emergencies. We're not borrowing for only for long-term investments. We're borrowing for immediate consumption. And any borrower, whether that's a person or a business or a government, if you borrow for immediate consumption with no long-term benefit, you're actually deteriorating your financial or fiscal future over the long run.
What's really critical here is what they call debt to GDP ratio. That is your debt to the size of your economy. We're almost at 100% debt to GDP. Looking at an economy the size of the U.S., usually a stability number is around 70%. So why is looking at that ratio important? Because it really shows whether you can service that debt.
Servicing the debt means paying back the debt and the interest on the amount to the lender.
The reason interest rates matter is because the government has to pay interest on its past debt. And as interest rates rise, those net interest payments start increasing dramatically.
The Federal Reserve has been increasing interest rates since March 2022 with the goal of slowing down economic activity.
When you raise interest rates, you have to pay more to service the debt. You can't do the national programs we need to do without incurring even more debt.
The federal government paid $475 billion in interest on the national debt in 2022. That's nearly 2% of GDP.
The Fed is pushing up interest rates, and this is feeding hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in additional income to bondholders. So people who are holding government bonds, paying higher rates of interest, are getting a huge windfall.
Debt helps your economy because so you can take on large initiatives like infrastructure. You could take on crises like the pandemic. But you have to watch where your debt to GDP ratio is, because that really is the stability indicator of whether you can actually service this debt or whether you're tilting the balance.
There are good uses of debt. There are bad uses of debt. The public debt is one thing we're going to pass to the next generation. So is the quality of the environment. So is the infrastructure and roads and broadband and et cetera. So we need to balance both, the costs and benefits that we send to future generations.
We're the wealthiest nation on earth, and we're basically taking resources that we don't have today and borrowing from the future.
I think the biggest point of confusion or piece of misinformation about this thing we call the national debt is that it is somehow a burden to the rest of us, right? You'll hear people talk about the national debt burdening future generations. It ends up scaring people because you're thinking that the federal government's budget works like a household budget, and that if the government is borrowing and taking on debt, that somehow it's going to find itself in a situation somewhere down the road where it can no longer afford to pay the bills. And that's just simply not true. The government's budget doesn't work anything like a household budget.
The U.S. isn't the only country with debt. There are 15 other countries with higher debt to GDP ratios than the U.S., with Japan having the largest in the world. Economist Stephanie Kelton says Japan's economic situation illustrates why debt isn't as harmful as mainstream economists suggest it is.
The Japanese government has been running fiscal deficits basically for the last 3 decades. Has it been inflationary? No. Has it driven interest rates sky high and crowded out private investment? No. Has Japan faced any kind of a fiscal solvency crisis as a result? No. When you look at what mainstream economics tells us is supposed to happen, if governments, don't balance their budgets, if they run persistent fiscal deficits, if the debt continues to rise, interest rates are supposed to go up, it's supposed to trigger inflationary problems, solvency risk, and all the rest of it just didn't happen.
One could say, with 2020 hindsight, that Japan hasn't had any debt default or debt crisis. And again, that's in part because the rates at which they borrow at have been very low. The Japanese economy has been growing very slowly and very sluggishly. We don't know what the counterfactual is. We don't know how much faster the Japanese economy would have grown had they not been saddled with so much public debt.
The U.S. national debt tends to make headlines alongside words like default and debt ceiling.
A default is any time the government does not make a payment that it promised to make.
We're one of 2 countries, I think, on the planet that has this sort of a debt ceiling in place. The other is Denmark, and they set it so high that it never really becomes an issue for them. Here, the debt ceiling limit is a self-imposed constraint. It's something that Congress put in place. Congress has given 2 sets of instructions to the executive branch. Congress is saying, spend this money that we have authorized, these programs in this budget, but don't issue any more of this specific type of security in order to facilitate that payment. So it kind of leaves the executive branch in a position where it's got to find a way to continue to spend because it's authorized under the law to spend, but not spend in the way that it normally would.
I wish we could get rid of the entire debt ceiling issue. It's totally unnecessary in the first place because the government can't spend money unless Congress authorizes it anyway.
The fight over the debt ceiling can have serious consequences for the U.S. and the global economy. Fitch, one of the bond rating services, lowered the U.S. credit rating in early August 2023 from the top category to a slightly lower one.
It was a combination of 3 things. One is the rising debt to GDP ratio in the current forecast. The second is the lack of an explicit plan to deal with that. And third is the kind of terrible governance that Congress demonstrated in the debt limit buildup that occurred a few months ago, with many congressional Republicans threatening default if their demands were not met.
As of December 2022, about $7.4 trillion of U.S. debt is held by foreign governments or investors, which makes up 30% of publicly held debt. If countries holding U.S. debt start to believe it's not a safe investment, it may lead to a run on the bank, so to speak.
Why would we care about the stock of debt held by foreigners? The reason is that when we think about how a debt crisis could emerge, it's much like a banking crisis. One day we wake up and we no longer believe an entity is solvent. And so we run, right? We run for the exits. That sort of behavioral response is very similar, just playing out at an international level when we have debt crises. That foreigners run for the exits, where they're seeing there's no agreement in the US over fiscal policy, and the debt to GDP ratio keeps ratcheting up, and interest rates are slowly getting higher, making it harder for the US to pay off that existing debt. So those kinds of signals could, lead some to begin to sell US treasuries.
Ultimately, the U.S. national debt isn't getting paid off anytime soon.
People are at the abstract level in favor of cutting the deficit. The problem is at the implementation level, they oppose spending cuts that would affect them, and they favor tax increases that would affect them. The debt trajectory is worrisome, not a crisis, but worrisome. But there's a significant minority that says that we face so many other issues that we can afford some more debt.
Imagine a place where everything money-related is frozen in time for almost 3 decades. Your salary doesn't budge, the price of your unagi bowl doesn't change, and the interest rate on your home mortgage is closer to 0.
Well, that was the reality here in Japan. We were used to the price of everything staying pretty much the same.
But it wasn't always like this. Since the end of World War II, Japan has been ground zero for some of the biggest experiments in economics. Older Japanese like Tomiko, a pensioner, and Suetaka, who runs a real estate agency, have experienced a roller coaster of changes throughout their lives. Now, Japan's central bank has decided it's time to end its latest experiment and exit negative interest rates. For the first time since 2007, the Bank of Japan, or the BOJ, raised rates.
YCC gone, the end of negative rates as well.
So how did Japan decide to manage its economy so differently from the rest of the world? And how is this massive shift going to disrupt day-to-day lives across the country?
Japanese growth hasn't always been this stagnant. At one point, the economy was growing so fast that it looked like it was about to overtake the US as the world's biggest. Taro Kimura covers the Japanese economy for Bloomberg Economics. Before, he used to work at the BOJ, so here he is with a mini history lesson.
After the post-war devastation, Japan achieved something called economic miracle from the 1960s to early 1970s. That growth was led by a huge domestic demand because the middle-class households were expanding. In the late 1980s, Japan's economy actually accounted for about 10% of world's total economy.
楽しかったよね。私たちの時にはそう。
Wait, what is it?
Economy. Domestic demand because
217 billion in 1970. I wonder what America's was. Probably around the same. Or maybe a little more.
The middle-class households were
1.3 trillion in 1980.
In the late 1980s, Japan's economy actually accounted for about 10% of world's total economy.
楽しかったよね。私たちの時にはそんなに
We were young.
困ら
We
なかっ
didn't
たんですよ
have
ね。
much
結
to
構お
worry
給料
about.
も良かった
Salaries
し、
were pretty
ボー
good.
ナスも良かっ
And
た
the
ので。
bonuses were good
それがず
too.
っと続くと思ってた
We
わ
thought it would go
け。
on
紬の業者
forever.
はビール
The
で足を洗って
economy
歩き
was
よ
so good.
言われるぐらい
They were saying salesmen wash their feet with beer.
At the time, many were flush with cash and reckless spending was the norm. By the end of the 1980s, the stock market was on the up and up, hitting record highs.
What was crazier was the real estate price. For example, the land price of Tokyo's Imperial Palace was said to be equivalent to the price of the state of California.
Then, the bust came. In the first of its shock moves, the BOJ sharply raised interest rates in 1989, trying to curb speculation and rein in inflation. The government also introduced measures to cool the property sector.
Nikkei stock price index fell to half of its peak value, and real estate prices also plunged that led to a long-term downturn.
そういうバブルの時代、その当時買った人たちは一旦バブルが弾けた時にはすぐ倒産の気分にあったわけですね。バブルは所詮弾けるんです。
At some point, a bubble always pops.
Authorities had tried to pump the brakes, but instead they sent the economy to a screeching halt.
People in Japan didn't experience wage growth and inflation for about 3 decades. That means one generation for people. I myself, growing up in Japan, learned the concept of inflation from macroeconomic textbook. Living in the world in no inflation make people attach a certain product with a certain price.
物も上がってないけど給料も上がってないよねと今気づいてよその国と比較したときにこんなにも取り残されてしまったということですよね。
A small amount of inflation can help drive economic growth by keeping money moving around. Most economies
And that's what we were talking about, is like, you want a small amount of inflation. Not a bad thing. But what Biden did, I mean, come on.
Ooh.
Yeah, let's not get started with that.
economies target relatively mild inflation of about 2%.
2000. Here's Obama's presidency. Went up. Kind of when Trump became president, right?
Yeah. Things went down. It was
And
stable for a while.
and then it was
2020 came.
And that's coronavirus.
Yeah.
And then it spiked back up.
But as you can see from the yellow, Japan's inflation stayed below that for a long time.
Oh, but that
As
was
things
Japan's
got worse,
inflation.
the Bank of Japan followed the typical playbook for central banks, lowering interest rates. You can see the Fed, for example, slashed rates to cope with the fallout from the 2008 financial crisis. But the BOJ, for more than 20 years, kept at it with its almost flat line, but it didn't help lift the country out of deflation. In 2013, the BOJ decided to do something drastic again. It introduced the quantitative and qualitative easing policy, an unconventional move where they basically print a lot of cash and pump it into the market by aggressively buying Japanese government bonds. It was successful at first, but Japan faced deflation again a couple years later, so the BOJ went back to its box of tricks. In 2016, it adopted negative rates, a move that divided economists. The main goal was to deter saving and also punish banks that hoarded cash, but that didn't really work either. In response, the BOJ invented something called yield curve control.
Oh, Piddlywinks, this is
an attempt
this
that
is Birdo.
the BOJ controls
He was
not
on my
only
stream
short-term
a couple
but
weeks
also
ago.
the long-term rates, so that the
Welcome.
businesses
Hello,
and
hello,
households
hello.
don't have to worry about too much fluctuation in interest rates.
It could keep interest rates low by threatening to buy bonds without always having to actually buy them. That still didn't solve everything. Companies couldn't find enough profitable ways to invest their money in Japan. Many ended up looking abroad for better returns, so much so that Japan became the biggest foreign holder of U.S. Treasury debt, overtaking China. Suddenly, in 2022, all of that changed. Japan finally hit its 2% inflation target. The problem was what prompted it. First, it was higher energy costs due to the Ukraine war. And second, a weaker yen.
The Bank of Japan continued easy monetary policy to stimulate the economy and even inflation. However, the other major central banks hiked rates in order to fight inflation.
Eventually, it was external forces that pushed Japan toward ending its experiments. In other words, it was not the sort of inflation that Japan wanted because it wasn't coming from consumers spending more. Wages stayed low, even as inflation hit 4.3% in January 2023, which was the fastest in decades. But it still caused the yen to weaken, boosting profits at companies like Sony and Toyota, which sell products abroad. That finally brought about some signs of change.
The business leaders who used to be reluctant to raise compensations in the fear of having a lot of fixed costs now started to become open to raise wages.
The main labor unions secured the biggest wage increases in 30 years. So finally, on March 19th, 2024, the BOJ took a big step.
The Bank of Japan has ended negative interest rates 17 years since the last hike.
They're scrapping the yield curve control, and they're also going to essentially pare back their purchase of ETFs.
Raising the interest rate from negative 0.1% to a range of 0 to 0.1% doesn't seem like much, but it does put Japan back in line with other economies. We asked at the top that if Japan's negative rates experiment ends, what now? Well, here are some of the changes we can expect to see. First, mortgages will get more expensive for the first time in decades, and interest payments on the government's more than $8 trillion of debt, which is about twice the size of the country's economy, will increase. The same thing will happen to companies. It could also propel the yen higher. That means your trips to Japan could get more expensive, and Japanese exports would take a hit too. On the flip side, it can also make investing in Japan more lucrative. Plus, cheaper fuel and food imports are good news for Japanese consumers.
買い物するときはまず 50% オフとか 30% オフとかまずそこの方に行ってそこで買ってそれ以外に他に必要なものは普通のお値段のところへ行って買う。
5年後ですか。豊かになってるでしょうね。10年後と言われるとわからないですけど。
Wow. That lady at the end, she just said, for some groceries, she buys the cheaper stuff. But for other groceries, she buys the more expensive stuff. Which I think, you know, I've never been a big fan, to be honest, of off-brand food at the grocery store. I always figured that it's cheaper because it's not as healthy, it's not as nutritional. Berto, is that how you think? Like, why are some foods cheaper than other foods, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, they got to cater to the middle class and to those who are not middle class. And so I think...
Lower class.
Yeah, the lower class. And I feel that when the prices are the way they are, there's certain items that we know that are similar, maybe not what we're used to, but because
fruit
of
rounds,
the spending,
instead of Fruit
you got to be
Loops.
more conservative. And, you know, instead of getting the Fruit Loops, you're getting the Tutti Fruities or whatever those things are called. But, you know, there is a difference in taste. But, you know, at this point, I think more people, not just in America, but all over the world, want to, I guess, not spend as much as a lot of money on just groceries. So, yeah, it's a tough one. But, yeah, there's certain items that I get that are maybe off-brand that taste similar.
Dr. Thunder.
Yeah, you know, but it's either way they know that the consumers are going to buy it. It's either it's going to be X brand, it's going to be this brand. This one you're saving 10 cents less, you know.
So do you think if Biden becomes reelected that the off-brand products will have an explosion in the sales, essentially? Because nobody will be able to afford the Fruit Loops. You know, they're going to have to get the fruit rounds.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, it does, elections do have consequences. And I think we're starting to see that more and more and more as we are, you know, being humans and civilians of our great nation. But, yeah, I
You're
think,
a human?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not.
I'm human.
I'm
no alien.
I'm a lizard person. That's why I have to wear this mask.
Yeah.
Berto, don't listen.
I'm an alien.
He's an alien. I'm a lizard person.
I'm an alien. Oh, gosh, again. Number 4. 4 times today. 4 times.
Dude, I'm sorry for...
Hey, I mean, inflation, the conversation of groceries being up, and then we're somewhat to the point where it kind of seems like we're forced to buy cheaper items just so then our pocketbooks aren't, stressing. So, which we got, again, we're not against cheaper products or anything like that. It's just that because of where things are with the economy, we're kind of forced to, like they mentioned in these videos we're watching today, our habits are they're kind of tempered with. The behavior of our shopping is different than it was a few years ago. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people could agree with that. So, but I hope that answered your question, Stretch.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
All right, you guys. Thanks for tuning in for another great episode of the Stretchy Mexican Show with my co-host, Berto. Nailing it. It's our second time doing this, and I think we're getting a little better, and that's all you can really hope for is every stream, we get a little better, that's...
Yep, and we're learning so much along the way, so thank you for your patience, you guys.
Yes, thank you very much, and I really hope you guys tune in for our next episode where we could potentially talk about transgender issues. We could talk about going to the moon and Mars. We could, it's just every topic is going to be different. Every episode. We're not, we may, obviously in a couple years, revisit inflation and stuff. But as far as the topics, they will be very interesting and worth your while. I hope you learned something on tonight's episode. I know me and Berto did. So anyway, stay tuned for next week, Friday night, 7 p.m., same time, same place. And God bless you guys and be safe out there. And stay happy.
Rock and roll, you guys.
And
Good night.
Help everybody you can help. Good night.